"Ma'am, step aside. You can't board," the agent said. Her tone clipped, carrying across the crowded gate area. The words cut through the low hum of rolling suitcases and muted conversations. A sharp beep from the scanner had drawn eyes, and now every glance was fixed on Amahle Asante. Families shifted uneasily, business travelers frowned, and the quiet rhythm of boarding halted as though her presence alone had disrupted the process. Amahle stood still, boarding pass in hand, dressed in a tailored blazer and neat slacks. Her outfit blended with the professionalism of the space, but her calm composure seemed invisible to the agent who now regarded her as an obstacle. The man behind her sighed heavily, muttering about delays, while a mother tugged her child closer and whispered, "Just wait, honey." Passengers moved past in a stream of green lights and effortless access, their entry unquestioned. Amahle glanced at the small screen, knowing her ticket was valid. "There must be some mistake," she said evenly, her voice neither loud nor pleading, but steady. The agent didn't glance at the scanner again. She folded her arms. "I said step aside." The command was final, dismissive, as if Amelie's presence in the boarding line was itself an error. Heat rose in Amelie's chest, though her face remained composed. She'd heard this tone before, in classrooms where her intelligence was doubted, in offices where her authority was overlooked, and in countless moments when her very right to exist in professional spaces was second-guessed. Every memory pressed against her chest now, layered onto this single, public humiliation. "I'm with the FAA," she began, reaching into her bag, her fingers brushing the leather folder that held her federal credentials. The agent exhaled sharply. Impatient. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be. If you don't move, we'll have to call security." Her voice was loud enough to carry. The message wasn't just for Amahle. It was for the watching crowd, recasting her as a problem. Phones tilted upward. A few passengers started recording, hungry for confrontation. To them, Amahle was no longer a professional traveler or federal inspector. She was a spectacle. Her throat tightened, but she didn't lash out. She had spent years learning the art of restraint, of swallowing indignities so she could push forward, of tempering justified anger in order to remain acceptable. But each second she stood frozen at the gate, her patience thinned. She thought of her work, her responsibilities, the very reason she was in this airport: to inspect, to ensure safety, to uphold standards that kept lives protected. Her identity was not only professional, it was authoritative, earned through years of study and unrelenting effort. And yet, at this moment, none of that mattered. All the gate agent saw was a black girl she assumed didn't belong. The silence stretched. Behind her, the line shuffled forward, scanning green, as though the world had already judged and moved past her point. One question lingered in the air, invisible yet heavy. Who was Amahle Asante, really? The agent didn't know. The passengers didn't know. But soon, they would. And the revelation would not only flip the balance of this confrontation, it would reveal the deeper failure of a system too ready to judge and too slow to see. Have you ever been judged before someone even knew your name? Comment yes if you relate. Long before Amahle Asante stood at an airport gate with strangers' eyes on her, she had stood in another terminal as a little girl, her hand tucked into her mother's. She remembered the moment clearly. The polished shoes of pilots striding past, the sharp uniforms of flight crews, the endless announcements over the speakers. But what struck her most that day wasn't the planes outside or the noise of travel. It was the sight of a black woman walking confidently in a pilot's uniform, her cap tilted just right, her stride filled with authority. Amahle had tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "She looks like me." Her mother had smiled, eyes soft with pride. "Yes, baby. That's why you can be anything." That moment planted a seed. For Amahle, aviation became more than machines and runways. became proof that she could belong in a world that often told her otherwise. As she grew older, her fascination deepened. While other children doodled cartoons or celebrities in the margins of their notebooks, Amahle sketched wings, engines, and cockpits. She consumed every book she could find about aerodynamics, flight history, and women who broke barriers. Her dream sharpened into focus. She didn't want to just fly. She wanted to guard the skies, to ensure safety with the same precision she admired in that pilot's stride. That path led her not to an airline cockpit, but to the Federal Aviation Administration, where her role as an aviation safety inspector became her form of service. She wanted her career to prove that rules, standards, and excellence mattered more than prejudice, that she could build a world measured by skill, not stereotypes. But the journey was never smooth. In classrooms, she often felt her presence dismissed. Before she even spoke, a professor once looked at her and said, "You don't really seem like the type for this field." She had smiled politely, even as frustration churned in her stomach, and went on to earn the highest grade in his course. In early training sessions, she found herself mistaken for administrative staff more times than she could count. "Where's the inspector?" supervisors would ask, even as she stood in front of them wearing the badge. Each time, she forced a polite correction, each time reminding herself that proving them wrong quietly was safer than calling out their bias aloud. This constant pressure shaped her in ways that were both painful and powerful. Silence became a strategy, a tool she carried like armor. She learned when to let a comment pass, when to clench her jaw and keep moving. Her resilience didn't come from an absence of hurt. It came from learning to navigate it without letting it define her. Still, the weight of those moments accumulated. 1,000 small reminders that her authority could be invisible if someone chose not to see it. Research would later confirm what she already knew in her bones, that constant microaggressions chip away at confidence, producing stress, fatigue, and even illness. For Amahle, the toll was quieter but no less real. It lived in her sleepless nights before inspections, in the careful way she measured her tone in meetings, in the fatigue that followed every day she had to justify her right to be where she stood. Yet, despite it all, she refused to step back. Each slight only reinforced her determination. She became known within her department as meticulous, prepared, and unshakable under pressure. When she walked an airfield, she didn't just see runways. She saw every crack, every faded marking, every risk others overlooked. She took pride in her work because it wasn't only about rules. It was about proving that someone like her could hold this authority with excellence. Behind her professionalism lived a paradox. Every day she enforced rules with precision, knowing she lived in a world where rules could be bent against her. She brought objectivity to her work, while prejudice trailed her in daily life. It was an exhausting contrast, believing in fairness even when she rarely experienced it herself. For Amahle, professionalism wasn't just her career. It was resistance. Every inspection she completed, every standard she enforced, was her way of showing that her competence was undeniable, even if others refused to see it. She told herself, again and again, "I don't need to be loud to be undeniable." That belief carried her through the years, until the day she found herself at the boarding gate, reduced to a problem in the eyes of strangers. What those strangers couldn't know was that the woman they dismissed had built her life on turning doubt into excellence. They saw only the surface, but underneath was the same little girl who once whispered in awe at a pilot who looked like her, and who had grown into a professional whose authority reached higher than they could imagine. The security line was long, but moving. Travelers shuffled forward, arms loaded with laptops and plastic bags of toiletries, eyes dull with routine. Amahle waited patiently, her briefcase balanced against her leg, the weight of her FAA credentials resting inside. She had been through this process countless times, knew every step by heart. Shoes off, laptop in bin, liquids in their clear pouch. She moved with efficiency, as if the ritual were second nature. The body scanner beeped once as she stepped out. A quick glance at the monitor should have cleared her. Instead, the TSA officer's eyes lingered on her hair. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to do a physical search of your hair," the officer said flatly. Amahle blinked, momentarily stunned. She had worn her locks for years, neat and pulled back. Professional in every sense of the word. They had never set off alarms. She glanced at the screen. No indicators, no anomalies highlighted. Still, the officer's eyes were fixed on her scalp, not the machine. Asterisk, this is just protocol, the officer added, though the words felt rehearsed, hollowed out. A line of passengers grew behind her, waiting, watching. Amahle felt the familiar burn of eyes on her, felt her presence morph into spectacle. Slowly, she nodded, though inside her chest tightened. The officer slipped on a fresh pair of gloves with a snap and began patting, pressing, and squeezing the crown of her head, fingers digging into her locks. Amahle stood frozen, chin lifted, refusing to flinch. Yet each touch was an invasion, a reminder that her body could be treated as suspect without cause. She had read stories of black women forced into these searches, their hair questioned as though it concealed contraband rather than identity. Now she was one of them. A man nearby shifted uncomfortably, murmuring to his partner. A teenage boy craned his neck for a better look. A woman in line pulled out her phone, angling it discreetly toward Amahle. The public nature of it all, the exposure, the reduction of her dignity to a curiosity, was as sharp as the officer's fingers pressing into her scalp. Her mind churned. If I protest, I'll be labeled difficult. If I raise my voice, I'll be the angry black woman. If I walk away, I'll be noncompliant. Every option carried risk, every response a potential escalation. She knew too well how quickly restraint could be reframed as aggression. Research had long confirmed the pattern. Lawsuits had been filed by women who described almost identical experiences, targeted because of braids, twists, or locks. The TSA had promised to review its procedures after repeated complaints, but the incidents continued. One woman, an accomplished scientist, had written publicly about how the searches made her feel like a criminal in plain sight of everyone else. Another described leaving an airport bathroom in tears after a stranger's hands had violated her personal space under the guise of safety. Amahle could have added her own testimony to those records. Each squeeze of her scalp was its own small wound, but together they spoke to a larger truth, that no credential, no professional title, no accomplishment could protect her from being reduced to suspicion. Her internal voice whispered what she could not say aloud. This is the cost of silence. This is what it feels like to carry dignity in pieces, to hold it tight while strangers strip it away. The officer finally stepped back, gloves discarded into a bin. "All clear," she announced, already turning to the next traveler. The violation was over for her, just another box checked. But for Amahle, it lingered. She adjusted her blazer, smoothing invisible wrinkles, her hands steady though her stomach felt hollow. The line behind her shuffled forward, restless. The world had moved on, but she remained, carrying the invisible weight of yet another reminder that her body, her presence, could be questioned at any time. She picked up her briefcase and walked away, her stride calm, deliberate. Outwardly, she was composed. Inwardly, she replayed the moment again and again. The officer's eyes, the public stares, the helplessness of standing still while her very self was prodded like luggage. She thought of how many others had endured the same, thought of the quiet exhaustion that bound their experiences together. Amahle knew she would not cry. She would not rage. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But the silence she carried was heavy, and with every step she felt its cost. She reminded herself, her worth was not up for debate. Her authority was real, even if unseen. And soon, when the moment came, those who doubted her would learn exactly who she was. The gate area buzzed with the usual mix of impatience and exhaustion. A child cried softly in the corner while a businessman barked into his phone, pacing by the window. Overhead, an announcement about a connecting flight crackled. In the middle of it all, Amahle stepped up to the counter, briefcase in hand, ready to confirm her meeting with airport management before she boarded. The gate agent didn't bother to look up. Her eyes were glued to the computer screen as her fingers tapped impatiently. "Name?" she asked, voice flat, the tone of someone who had already decided the answer wouldn't matter. "Amahle Asante. I'm here on official duty." The agent gave a perfunctory glance before returning to her screen. Her lips tightened into something between irritation and disbelief. "This line is for passengers. If you need assistance, customer services." Behind security, Amahle inhaled slowly, holding on to her composure. "I'm not here for customer service. I'm here to meet the airport operations team." She placed her credentials folder on the counter. "I'm an FAA inspector." The agent gave the folder a dismissive tap without opening it. Her eyebrows arched. "Right? And I'm supposed to believe that." The words stung, not because they were new, but because they were familiar. She had heard them in different forms too many times before. Not believable, not possible, not professional. The subtext was always the same. "Not you," before Amahle could respond. The agent waved her hand toward the seating area. "Please step aside. We need to keep things moving." Behind her, the line shuffled forward. Passengers began whispering, eyes darting between the scene and the gate. A man leaned toward his wife and muttered, "She's holding things up." Another passenger, phone in hand, started recording discreetly, angling the lens to capture both Amahle and the unimpressed agent. The murmur of voices pressed against Amahle like a weight. She felt the sting of being made a spectacle yet again, her identity stripped down to nothing more than an inconvenience. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice cut in. The supervisor, a man in a navy jacket with silver pins, approached with the kind of authority that assumed he was walking into a minor disruption. The gate agent straightened slightly, her tone suddenly respectful. "This woman says she's here on official business." The supervisor turned to Amahle with a polite smile that carried no warmth. "Ma'am, I don't know what you're trying to do, but we have procedures. Please step aside and let the real professionals work." The phrase landed like a punch to the gut. The real professionals. That Amahle's hand tightened around the handle of her briefcase. She stood tall, refusing to shrink even as the supervisor's words stripped her of legitimacy. In front of a growing audience. It wasn't just dismissal, it was erasure. The quiet assumption that her role, her years of training, her authority simply did not exist. That a ripple of laughter broke out from somewhere in the waiting area. Someone whispered, "She probably just wants a free upgrade." The humiliation wasn't just in the words of the staff, but in the chorus of judgment from bystanders eager to assign her a motive. Amahle's throat ached, but she remained silent, at least outwardly. Inside, her thoughts churned. How many times must I prove myself? How many times must I let strangers decide whether I belong? Her eyes flicked to the phone's recording. In another hour, perhaps clips of this encounter would circle online, stripped of context, painted however the recorder chose. She could already hear the comments. "She's overreacting. She should have just followed instructions. Why make it about race?" The supervisor leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound condescending without losing the audience. "You seem like an intelligent woman. Don't embarrass yourself here. Take a seat. Someone else will handle it." Embarrass herself. The irony of the words burned. She was being publicly humiliated, and yet the risk of shame was somehow hers. Alone to carry. For a moment, Amahle considered retreating, swallowing the insult, disappearing into the crowd. It would be easier, safer. But as the whispers grew louder and the agent's smirk settled into her skin, She felt something shift inside her. She remembered the little girl staring up at the black woman in the pilot's uniform. She remembered the professor who told her she didn't belong, the colleagues who overlooked her, the countless small moments where silence seemed safer than defiance. She realized that every concession had led to this very point. If she stayed silent now, she would not only lose her dignity, she would betray every ounce of effort it had taken to reach this place. The humiliation at the gate was not the first, but it would be the one that demanded an answer. Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere you worked hard to reach? Hit like. Amelie's pulse thudded in her ears, but her posture remained unbroken. Around her, whispers swirled, recording lights blinked, and the supervisor's smug expression lingered, convinced he had contained an inconvenience that I in that. Silence. Amahle made her choice. Without a word, she set her briefcase gently on the counter, the click of its latches sharp against the din of the terminal. Every sound seemed amplified, the shuffle of shoes, the crinkle of snack wrappers, the overhead announcement about baggage claim. But all eyes had shifted back to her. Slowly, deliberately, she reached inside the case. Her fingers brushed over papers, pens, and the worn leather folder she had carried for years. She lifted it with care, as though she were handling a sacred object, and placed it squarely on the counter. The gate agent's smirk faltered. Amahle flipped open the folder. The gold seal caught the fluorescent light, gleaming against the dull backdrop of the airport terminal. Inside, her photo stared back, framed by bold letters. Federal Aviation Administration. Aviation Safety Inspector. The crowd leaned in. The moment stretched like slow motion. The agent's eyes widened, darting between the badge and Amahle's steady face. The supervisor cleared his throat, the arrogance in his expression dissolving into something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. His voice cracked slightly. "You're with the FAA?" Amahle's reply was calm, measured, each syllable precise. "Yes, I am here on official duty, and you've just obstructed a federal inspection." The words dropped like a stone in water, rippling across the gate. The passengers who had laughed now whispered with new tones, astonishment, disbelief, shame. A man lowered his phone abruptly, as though embarrassed to have recorded the moment. The gate agent's hands trembled as she tried to form words. I didn't realize. You thought I couldn't be who I said I was." Amahle finished for her, her voice low but carrying. "You saw what you wanted to see." The supervisor stammered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. We were just following procedure. You have to understand, this wasn't personal, but it was personal. Every glance, every smirk, every dismissal had been personal. Yet Amahle refused to raise her voice. Rage might have felt justified, but it wasn't what she wanted them to remember. She wanted them to remember the truth. Her authority was not up for debate. She closed the folder with quiet finality, the sound louder than any argument. "I expect full cooperation moving forward," she said evenly, "and I will be documenting this incident in my report." The gate agent's face drained of color. The supervisor nodded quickly, his earlier condescension replaced by flustered deference. "Of course, Inspector. Whatever you need. We're happy to assist." Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some looking away, others pretending to scroll through their phones. The spectacle had transformed. Amahle was no longer the disruption. The disruption was the staff who had dismissed her. For a brief moment, she let the silence linger. Not to gloat, not to savor their panic, but to underscore the reality they had tried to erase. Authority was not about raised voices or grand gestures. It was about facts, credentials, and years of dedication that no smirk or dismissive tone could erase. She gathered her folder, slid it back into her briefcase, and straightened her blazer. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, and unspoken. Reminder that she was in control now. The agent finally found her voice, though it wavered. "Inspector Asante, Would you like us to contact operations for you? Amahle met her gaze, holding it steady. Yes. And next time, when someone presents themselves as a professional, remember that appearances do not determine authority. Competence does. The supervisor nodded furiously, already fumbling for his radio. Amahle turned slightly, scanning the faces of the bystanders who had recorded, whispered, judged. Most avoided her eyes. A few offered sheepish smiles. She didn't return them. She didn't need their validation. What mattered was that, in a single calm act, she had reclaimed her dignity. She had shown that her power didn't come from anger, but from the undeniable truth of her position. As she walked past the gate counter, the atmosphere had shifted. The same people who had seen her as a problem now watched her with caution, even respect. But Amahle knew respect offered under pressure wasn't the same as true recognition. Still, she had made her point. Controlled professionalism had won the moment. And for now, that was enough. The supervisor still fumbled with his radio, his earlier smugness gone, replaced by hurried apologies. The gate agent stood frozen, cheeks flushed, as if willing the ground to swallow her. Passengers shifted in their seats, trying to act as though they weren't still staring. Amahle, however, was unmoved. She had no interest in their discomfort. Her purpose was greater than proving them wrong. If they doubted her professionalism before, she would show them now, not through anger, but through precision. She reached once more into her briefcase, this time pulling out a slim notepad embossed with the FAA seal. The simple gesture drew the attention of anyone still watching. Her tone was calm, even clinical, as she addressed the staff. Since I'm here, we'll begin with a preliminary inspection. I'll document immediate concerns before proceeding with your operations team. The words landed heavily. The gate agent swallowed hard. The supervisor forced a nod. Of course, Inspector. Whatever you need. Amahle adjusted her blazer and stepped past the counter, her eyes already scanning the concourse with the practiced sharpness of an inspector. Years of training clicked into place. What others dismissed as background noise, she saw as data. Her gaze fell first on the signage above the jet bridge. The hold position placard was peeling at the edges, its lamination curling outward. She made a note. Laminate overlay compromised. Visibility risk. Potential for misinterpretation by ground vehicles. Passengers glanced up at the sign, suddenly noticing something they had never registered before. What had looked like ordinary wear and tear to them was, in fact, a violation. She moved toward the wide expanse of the taxiway visible through the terminal windows. The surface looked ordinary to the untrained eye, gray concrete stretching into the distance. But Amahle spotted a thin, jagged line across one section of pavement. A hairline crack, barely visible, but present, taxiway pavement. Developing crack, she dictated into her notepad. Potential source of foreign object debris if left unaddressed. The supervisor followed, nodding frantically as though agreement could erase his earlier dismissal. Yes, we'll escalate that immediately. Amahle didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes moved again, this time to the lighting along the taxiway. One of the edge lights flickered faintly, blinking in irregular intervals. She raised her pen. Taxiway light not stable. Visibility risk for night operations. The agent beside the counter shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the girl she had dismissed was now cataloging failures with unshakable authority. Amahle walked deliberately, every step measured. She paused at the side entrance near a service road, her gaze locking on the security fencing. One of the gates sat slightly ajar, its latch misaligned. To most, it would look like nothing. To her, it was an open door to a serious breach. Gate latch compromised, she noted. Unauthorized access risk to restricted tarmac. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, watching in silence as she moved. The spectacle they had once laughed at had transformed into a live demonstration of authority few understood. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't demanding apologies. She was dissecting the infrastructure around them with cool, factual precision. For Amahle, each observation was more than compliance. It was reclamation. Every note she made was a reminder that her authority was not a matter of opinion. It was codified, regulated, backed by federal standards that no gate agent's dismissal could erase. The supervisor tried to interject. Inspector, we do conduct regular checks. I'm sure these are isolated. Amahle cut him off with nothing more than a glance. The silence was louder than any rebuke. He faltered, shifting back a step. She returned to her notepad, her handwriting neat, clinical. Each detail she logged carried the weight of her training and the credibility of her office. There was no anger in her tone, no theatrics in her movements, only competence. When she finished her circuit, she closed the notepad with the same deliberate finality with which she had earlier closed her credentials folder. She turned back. To the gate agent and supervisor, these findings will be included in my report. I expect corrective action documented within the prescribed timeline. The gate agent nodded quickly, her earlier defiance erased. The supervisor swallowed, his face pale. Understood, Inspector. We'll address everything immediately. Amahle gave a single, quiet nod. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Her restraint was intentional. Her authority didn't need performance. It needed presence. As she walked back toward her seat, the passengers remained silent. The phones that had once been raised for mockery now rested in laps, uncertain whether to delete or preserve what they had captured. Some eyes followed her with new respect, others with shame. But Amahle didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She had shifted the atmosphere, not through outrage, but through the steady, undeniable force of professionalism. For the staff, humiliation came not from her words, but from the clarity of her evidence. For Amahle, vindication came not from their apologies, but from her calm demonstration that she had been the real professional all along. Amahle's calm authority at the gate wasn't just the product of personal resolve. It was the echo of a legacy that stretched back over a century, a lineage of individuals who had carved paths in the skies long before she carried her FAA badge. The first name in that lineage was Bessie Coleman, born in 1892. Denied access to flight schools in the United States because she was both black and a woman, Coleman refused to accept the limitations imposed on her. She saved money, learned French, and crossed the Atlantic to enroll in a flight school in France. In 1921, she earned her international pilot's license, becoming the first American woman of any race to do so. When she returned home, she refused to perform in air shows that excluded her people. She demanded integration, even when promoters pushed back. For her, flight wasn't just about the sky, it was about dignity. She proved that skill could break barriers, even when prejudice built walls. Decades later, another pioneer followed. Cornelius Coffey, along with Willa Brown, carried Coleman's torch. Denied entry to a white flight school, Coffey fought back, filing a lawsuit and eventually opening his own. Together, Coffey and Brown founded the first black-owned and certified flight school in the United States. Willa Brown herself became the first black woman to earn both a pilot's license and an instructor's certificate in America. Their school trained hundreds of pilots, many of whom would later join the fight in World War II. Their commitment wasn't just to flight, but to creating opportunity for those systematically locked out of it. And then came the Tuskegee Airmen, perhaps the most famous of them all. In the 1940s, at a time when segregation was law, these men trained and fought as a segregated unit in the U.S. Army Air Corps. They flew with distinction, protecting bombers over Europe and earning a reputation for unmatched skill. They returned home to a country that still questioned their worth, but their excellence was undeniable. They had proven, in combat, what their country refused to admit, that black aviators were as capable as any others and often more disciplined, more precise, more determined. This history wasn't abstract to Amahle. She had studied it, internalized it, and carried it like fuel. Coleman's defiance, Coffee and Brown's determination, the airman's discipline, all of it lived in her. As she stood in that terminal, each inspection she conducted, each report she wrote, was a continuation of that work. She might not have worn a pilot's cap or flown combat missions, but she was part of the same struggle to be seen, respected, and allowed to serve at the highest level without being dismissed before she even opened her mouth. Amahle was, in every sense, a modern skybreaker. Her role as an FAA inspector placed her in the lineage of those who had demanded a place in the sky and earned it through excellence. Where Coleman had crossed oceans for her license, Amahle had navigated years of skepticism and subtle dismissals in classrooms and offices. Where Coffee and Brown had built institutions, Amahle enforced the standards that kept aviation safe. Where the Tuskegee Airmen had proven their worth under fire, she proved hers under scrutiny, wielding technical expertise against the biases of her time, standing at that gate, not shouting, not flinching, but calmly documenting safety failures. Amahle embodied the paradox of every skybreaker before her. Competence unmatched, yet recognition withheld until forced into the open. But even as she carried this history, she knew legacy was not protection. Coleman's brilliance hadn't shielded her from racism. Coffee and Brown's achievements hadn't dismantled every barrier. The Tuskegee Airmen had returned from war to a country that still denied them equality. And now Amahle, with her badge and notepad, had lived the same truth. But even skybreakers can't always shield themselves from turbulence on the ground. The airport had grown quiet by the time Amahle left. The concourse lights glowed dimmer, the buzz of conversation replaced by the muffled hum of floor buffers. Her credentials were back in her briefcase, her notes carefully tucked away, her authority once again invisible. To the untrained eye, she was just another traveler wheeling a small suitcase toward the exit. The rental car lot was nearly empty. She found her vehicle, slid into the driver's seat, and let the silence press in. The inspection had silenced her doubters in the moment, but the victory felt strangely hollow. Her shoulders ached from the tension of holding her composure. Her chest carried the weight of what it had taken to remain steady when she had every reason to erupt. By the time she reached her hotel, exhaustion had wrapped around her like a heavy coat. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't scroll through her phone. Instead, she sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the folder that contained her FAA badge. That little rectangle of plastic had shifted the entire balance of power. At the gate, without it, she would have remained what they assumed she was, just a black woman out of place, dismissed before her name was even spoken. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her authority was unquestionable on paper, but invisible until displayed. It wasn't respect she had been given. It was fear of what her badge represented. The humiliation lingered, even after the deference. Amahle leaned back against the pillows, her mind replaying the words she'd heard too many times in her life. Step aside. You don't belong here. Each repetition left scars invisible to the eye, but carved deep within her. The airport incident was only the latest reminder that professionalism, degrees, titles, and certifications could never fully shield her from bias. Her story was more than her own. For every Amahle with credentials powerful enough to force recognition, there were countless others without such recourse. Everyday travelers, denied dignity without a badge to flash or a title to invoke. The injustice cut deeper because she knew her authority was not a universal shield. It was an exception, not the rule. That was the allegory of her life as an inspector, unseen authority. She carried expertise that most people could neither see nor measure, but which held immense responsibility. And just as her technical authority went unnoticed until challenged, so too did her humanity, until she was forced to remind others of it. The glow of the bedside lamp cast her reflection in the darkened window. She saw not only herself, but the history she carried. Coleman's defiance, Coffey and Brown's resilience, the airmen's discipline. Their legacy had given her strength, but their struggles had also taught her this truth. Change comes slowly, and victories often arrive layered with fatigue. She exhaled deeply, steadying herself. Tomorrow she would file her report, document the failures she had logged, and send them through the official channels. Life would return to its rhythm of inspections, checklists, and travel. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the weight of both triumph and weariness. The room was silent, but her thoughts were loud. How many more will endure this before something shifts? How long will professionalism have to double as armor? For the audience, the question hangs too. What does it mean when recognition only comes with proof? When dignity is conditional? When safety and respect depend on credentials? Do you think airlines and airports should face stricter penalties for incidents like this? Share your thoughts. Amahle closed her eyes. The battle at the gate was over, but the war for respect was ongoing. Her victory had not erased the humiliation. It had only illuminated the deeper truth. The sky might belong to everyone, but until ground-level prejudice is dismantled, too many will carry an unspoken ticket stamped with suspicion. Stories like Amahle's are not isolated moments. They are symptoms of a deeper problem, one that can't be solved with another diversity workshop or a glossy corporate pledge. Airports and airlines issue statements about equity and inclusion, but when bias plays out at the gate, those statements mean nothing. Real reform isn't about slogans, it's about accountability. That accountability means policies with teeth. It means consequences when staff repeatedly misuse vague terms like discrepancy or security concern to mask bias. It means giving frontline employees the training and tools to act with fairness, but also holding supervisors and corporations responsible when they fail. Without structural change, the cycle repeats. Humiliation, outrage, apology, silence, and then another incident. That Amahle's story forces us to ask hard questions. If someone with federal authority, years of technical training, and a badge backed by the U.S. government can be dismissed so easily, what happens to passengers without that shield? What about the child traveling alone, the family trying to make a connection, or the professional without credentials to prove their worth? Dignity should not depend on documentation. Respect should not hinge on whether a traveler can flash a title. Systemic problems require systemic answers. Airlines and airports must move beyond optics and confront the roots of bias. That means transparent reporting of incidents, independent oversight, and penalties that go beyond fines. Money alone does not change culture. Culture changes when people know there will be real consequences for discriminatory behavior, when apologies are no longer enough. This is where you, the audience, come in. These platforms amplify what people care about. When viewers speak up, when communities share their voices, institutions are forced to listen. Every comment, every like, every story shared chips away at the silence that allows bias to thrive. Would you keep supporting an airline caught in repeated bias cases? Let us know below. Amahle's inspection ended the confrontation, but it didn't end the pattern. Her composure in the face of humiliation was extraordinary, yet it should never have been required in the first place. Professionalism should not have to double as armor. Authority should not have to be proven again and again. The truth is simple. The sky should belong to everyone. But until systemic bias is dismantled, too many travelers will continue to carry an unspoken ticket, one stamped with suspicion.